Good morning, Fair Business Australians. Rebecca Lloyd coming at you from Brisbane, Australia. Many of you are already aware as to the events that took place yesterday in a Harvey Bay cafe, where a woman whose name was also Rebecca was arrested out the front of the cafe. Now, for those of you who are not aware what happened, according to the cafe owner themselves, the police arrived at the cafe and began to do compliance checks of the patrons' vaccine passports. They also checked that the cafe had all of the directives up around the cafe. And one of the patrons, Rebecca, once the police arrived, according to the cafe owners, she removed herself from the cafe because she was apparently dining in. Maybe she was just waiting for a takeaway. We don't really know that. And she went and stood at the front of the cafe on the curb. And what subsequently took place, which was videoed, and you can go and watch the video yourself, is that Rebecca was arrested, put into a paddy wagon and taken to the police station, put in a holding cell for 2 hours. Again, this is information that's been passed to me that is readily available on social media. I have not fact-checked it yet, but I will as soon as I'm able to speak with Rebecca herself. And she was subsequently given a $1,300 fine. There is a photo of her with some bruising along her upper arm where the police had grabbed her and she had resisted being pulled into the paddy wagon. Now you can hear her on the video saying, "I will tell you my name and address, but you cannot arrest me, you cannot arrest me."
I'm happy to provide my name and address.
Why is she under arrest? Why is she under arrest? We don't need to You cannot. Can you go away now, please? You cannot arrest her.
You can't arrest me.
You have been arrested.
This is ridiculous.
Now, I went and read through all of the different comments with that, both for and against the cafe's position, for and against Rebecca's position, and for and against the police position. Now, the trap as a community that we all tend to fall into and that we all need to be very careful of is to blow up and get extremely emotional about what is happening and fight it out amongst ourselves on social media. Now, that might make you feel better and that might make you feel like you're able to blow off steam like a pressure cooker, because for and against, we're all under pressure right now, whether you're very, very afraid of a virus and very afraid of being sick, or you're very afraid of the alternative, which a lot of the people that are on this particular channel sit in that camp. But we do have people from both sides of the fence. So rather than fight it out amongst each other and feel like we're really justified in our opinion, we really need to go back and very dispassionately look at what the law says. Now, at the risk of being rather vulgar, I would like to spend just a moment and ask for you to imagine what Rebecca did as being in a crowded elevator and you've had too much curry the night before and you've had a big one and you break wind in the elevator. Okay? Now, there are some people in that elevator that will feel amused by that. There are some people that will feel absolutely disgusted by that. So you have acted in a manner that for and against will react very differently, but have you actually broken the law? You might have done something that certain people find is morally and ethically reprehensible, and other people are like, well, you know, better out than in. So you have to come back to, is something actually unlawful? So whether people are afraid of Rebecca and thinking, oh my gosh, I might get sick, it's so rude of her, she shouldn't go to a cafe, or you think, well, Rebecca's standing up for her rights and she should be able to do that and she should be able to go wherever she damn well pleases, that actually doesn't really matter. What matters is the law. And if that person in the elevator was taken before a court of law and charged with flatulence in a public place, what kind of fine or what kind of sentence would they get? You're still entitled to your opinion, whether better out than in, or you're absolutely disgusting, you're a grub, and I hate you. But opinions matter nothing in a court of law. What matters is the law. And so we're not about to fight this out on Fair Business Australia in an opinion, and I can't believe that happened, and the police this, and the blah, 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 blah. No, that doesn't work. All that does is blow off steam and sets community against each other, butting heads. So what I've decided to do today is actually use this opportunity to further educate people on both sides of the fence as to where Rebecca actually stands, as to where the cafe owners actually stand, and to where the police officers actually stand. Now, I will intersperse it with my opinions because of how I am interpreting the law. And that is what would happen in a court of law. You have the judge, you have the jury, and you have the defense and the prosecutor, and it is up to them to take the law and to interpret the law for the benefit of the jury, and then the judge and the jury, they make the decision. The jury decides, the judge sentences, okay? But it all comes down to a central parallel, a plumb line, all right? So what I've done is I've pulled up the police pack that is available, and at the end I'm going to tell you how you can get this police pack. And if you are a business owner and you are on this channel, and if you haven't yet bought a business pack, you really need to fix that, and I'll explain to you why that is at the end. So let me just go across and read some of the things that are in this police pack in answer to the questions. Now, the first one was, why was the person even filming in the first place? Why were they filming? They had no right to be filming, da-da-da. Okay, this is not my opinion. I'm reading directly from the information provided in the police pack, which was created by a retired lawyer and was also taken directly from governmental websites, okay? So this is not opinion, and this is not, it should be like this and it should be like, no, this is actually the law, okay? So was the person in their rights to record? Let's take a look. Generally, it is lawful to record a spoken conversation if the person recording the conversation is part of it and neither the consent nor knowledge of the other parties of the conversation is required. However, there are laws that can apply to what can be done with the recording and to the recording spoken conversations you are not part of. You will find further information in the following pages. Okay, so the Invasion of Privacy Act 1971, Queensland, makes it an offence to audio record a private conversation. So first of all, what was happening in a very public setting, it was certainly not a private conversation you are not involved in. A person is involved in the conversation if they're part of it, for example, having a face-to-face or a phone conversation with someone, or involved in a group discussion. So what was happening yesterday was Rebecca was being spoken to and subsequently arrested by the police. It was a very public situation, and the police were engaging in dialogue with the person who was filming. Therefore, it is a group situation. Okay, the Invasion of Privacy Act prohibits communication or publication of the recording, but makes an exception for specific circumstances, including allowing it to be published or communicated to another person who was part of the conversation, not more than is reasonably necessary in the public interest. Well, in a court of law, that would be very much open to interpretation, because people on this side of the fence would say it's not in anybody's public interest at all. You should just be complying with what you're told. And on this side, it's in everybody's public interest because we believe that this woman was unlawfully arrested. Okay, so that's where you would have to battle that out in a court of law. In the course of legal proceedings, it may be necessary to seek legal advice to determine if an audio recording can be used. Okay, Surveillance Devices Act 2000. Under Section 732 of the Surveillance Devices Act 2007, New South Wales, a person can record a conversation if it is reasonably necessary for the protection of the lawful interests of the person. So the person that was recording that conversation deemed it reasonably necessary to protect the lawful interests of Rebecca, and that's why that person was filming. Okay, so reasonably necessary for the protection of the lawful interests of that principal party, or okay, all right. So can you record? Well, yes, you can. You are very much within your rights to record as long as the person knows and as long as you're involved and it's a group setting and all that stuff. So very much within their rights to record, okay? And that's the law. That's not my opinion. That's not they can do whatever they damn well please. Let's all just go and be mavericks and rogues. No, it's the law. And this is why in social media land, you have to start to educate ourselves and start to work from a plumb line, not from spouting off every 3 seconds about what you personally feel is either flatulence in an elevator, morally good or morally bad, all right? So interacting with the police. So this is where we get to Rebecca and where were we up to with her. Now, Rebecca had the right to remain silent, and Section 431 of the PPRA outlines cautioning of persons being questioned by a police officer and a person's right to silence as follows. Now, I didn't hear this part of the conversation, so I do not know whether the police cautioned Rebecca and told her that she had the right to remain silent. I don't know that. But a police officer must caution a person prior to questioning them. The caution must be given in or translated into a language which the person is reasonably fluent in. If the police officer suspects that the person does not understand the caution, they may ask them to explain it in their own words. If necessary, the police must further explain the caution. This provision sets the standards that police must adhere to when questioning a person in Queensland. The police must inform the person being questioned of their right to silence, and what they say may be used as evidence against them. The law requires police to be certain that the person understands their right to silence before they proceed to interview them. This may mean using an interpreter or asking the suspect to repeat the caution in their own words to ensure they've understood it. Okay, so you heard on the video that Rebecca said, "I will tell you my name and address. I will tell you my name and address. You can't arrest me. You can't arrest me. You cannot arrest me. I will tell you my name and address." Okay, so let's come through to that. Was she correct in that? Well, let's look at the law. Okay, Part 3 of the Law Enforcement Powers and Responsibilities Act 2002, New South Wales, outlines when a person is required to disclose their identity after being approached by the police. Pursuant to Section 11.1, a police officer may require a person to disclose their identity if it is suspected on reasonable grounds that the person may be able to assist in the investigation of an alleged indictable offence because they were in the vicinity of the alleged incident. Furthermore, an officer may require a person to disclose their identity if the officer proposes to give a direction to the person in accordance with Part 14 for the person to leave a place, or a move on direction. Now, I do not know whether the police instructed Rebecca to move on. I did not hear that part of the conversation. I only saw the video where she was pulled into the back of a paddy wagon and was arguing with them about their right to arrest her. So, if she was going to be given a move-on order, she would have needed to give her name and address. If she was alleged to have been, involved in a serious indictable offence, she needs to give her name and address. I guess if they had something on her personally. But again, it comes back to, was she actually breaking the law? And had she been given a move-on order that she had refused to go with? Now, according to the information I've received, that is not the fine that she was given. She was not given a fine for refusing to comply with a move-on order. She was given a fine for refusing to comply with a COVID direction. And a direction is not necessarily a law. And again, this is where it's very important that you stay dispassionate about the whole thing and you let people fight it out in a court of law. Unless you're going to end up doing civil war like the Americans, or laying down your tools and refusing to go to work and having a massive standoff with the bureaucrats and the government. The only other way to do this right now for events like this is to actually fight it out in a court of law. Now, anecdotally, the same thing happened for Sarah, Ben and Sarah from New Earth Cafe on the sunny coast. She was unlawfully arrested for not wearing a mask, for not going with a COVID direction, even though she had a mandate, even though she had a medical exemption. Now, those charges were then changed 3 times and were then dropped. And Ben and Sarah are now taking that incident to court for unlawful arrest. Okay, so anecdotally, this is not the first time it's happened that this has happened to Rebecca. It's not the first time it's happened. And God forbid, but it probably won't be the last time it's happened. So it's really important that you folks watching this, you know what your rights are. And you don't just keep spouting off on social media about your opinions. It doesn't help the situation, okay? So they're giving me an order. Section 791, offence to contravene direction or requirement of a police order. Police officer. A person must not contravene a requirement or direction given by a police officer, including a requirement or direction contained in a notice given by a police officer under this Act, unless the person has a reasonable excuse. And again, reasonable excuse, what does that boil down to? We'll talk about that in a moment. You have a reasonable excuse, which we outlined in the documents that I'll speak about in a moment. If the police arrest you, you will have the right to a phone call, and then you can seek legal support. Okay. If there is no health direction, there is no offence committed. Section 791, offence to contravene direction or requirement of a police officer. This section applies if a person is given a requirement or direction under this Act and no other penalty is expressly provided for a contravention of the requirement of the direction. A person must not contravene a requirement or direction given by a police officer, including a requirement or direction contained in a notice given by a police officer under this Act, unless the person has, again, a reasonable excuse. Otherwise expressly provided, it is a reasonable excuse for a person not to comply with a requirement or direction to give information if giving the information would tend to incriminate the person. So even if you've done something wrong, you may not need to give that information. because the law is silly at times and sometimes protects people that shouldn't be protected. So let's go across. Okay, let's recap briefly. According to the law, the person had every right to film, and it was probably because they deemed it in the best interests of Rebecca, and that's probably why they did it. I don't know, I haven't spoken with them personally, but that's my summation of it. Number 2, they could ask her for her name and address. Did they advise her of her right to remain silent? I don't know. Did they give her a move on order? I don't know. The video that I saw is not clear when it comes to that. So let's go through to the third point, which we'll talk about Rebecca and the cafe owners at Harvey Bay, which is the reasonable excuse. Now, I know this is a long video, and I know it's a hard video because social media minds are used to being entertained. Let's all watch cat videos. But please, please stay on until the end and be educated. This might be the best video you've watched in a long time when it comes to knowing your rights and knowing the rights of somebody else that you might see having a similar exchange with police officers. Now, the information I'm about to read to you now is actually part of the printout section of the police pack that is given to police officers. And it's really, really, it's nice. It's got a QR code that the police officer can scan. It's a lovely video explaining why you're being silent, explaining why you've got a trespass order up in your store, and then you don't say anything that would incriminate you, you just give them a printout. And if you do receive what at Fair Business Australia we believe to be an unlawful fine, then as long as enough people have purchased the police pack and there are legal funds in the kitty, we'll be able to pay for some or all of your legal expenses for you to fight it out in court, and you won't have to fight it out yourself. We've actually got lawyers now who have approached Fair Business Australia and want to work with us. And so that's why if you're on this platform as a business owner and you haven't yet bought a police pack, you need to get your insurance policy, because that's what it is, really. And there's only enough money in the legal kitty if you guys actually put money in there. It's not my money. It's not someone else's money, it's your money. Okay, so this is where we get through to reasonable excuse. Now, I'm not going to read all of them because they don't all apply to this not so isolated incident. Okay. So the cafe owners were accused of not doing the right thing. You're doing the wrong thing by not asking her for her vaccine status. Okay. I would like to, with the law, provide a reasonable excuse as to why the cafe owners were very much within their right to not ask Rebecca for her vaccine status. And that is the Australian Privacy Principle 3.3 in the Privacy Act 1988, which states that a business cannot collect sensitive health information, as the information is not reasonably necessary or directly relating to a function or activity of the business. Now, it is very, very widely agreed upon on both sides of the fence that if you are vaccinated, quote unquote, you can still transmit the virus and you can still get sick. Now, anecdotally, people who get the jab, oh, thank God I got the jab because now I've got COVID. I would have been so much more sick had I have not had the jab already. So they understand that they're still going to catch it and get sick, but they feel like it's like the flu shot. It makes you less sick. Okay? And these people feel like, well, if you're jabbed anyway, then why do you care whether I'm vaccinated or not? 10 years ago, you would either get the flu shot or you would not get the flu shot. You would still go to work. No one had an issue about it. No one cared. You either got sick or you didn't, or you got sick and you didn't. It didn't really matter. So it is not up to the cafe to, it doesn't matter, particularly because Rebecca was sitting outside anyway. All right. The cafe owner has a reasonable excuse not to breach Section 4(1)(d) of the Disability Discrimination Act 1992. We will not discriminate against any person who may have organisms capable of causing disease or illness. It is generally agreed that people can transmit COVID, whether jabbed or unjabbed. So we believe it is discrimination to not allow vaccine-free, quote-unquote, free customers into our business. Number 4. We do not wish to breach Section 7 of the Anti-Discrimination Act 1991, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of impairment. And we would argue that impairment is a person who is not vaccinated. Section 17 of the Human Rights Act 2019, which protects people from being treated in a cruel, inhuman or degrading way. Now, this I will intersperse with my own opinion. I think the way Rebecca was treated yesterday by makeup up all over my face. I think the way Rebecca was treated yesterday by the police was degrading. I personally believe that. I think the way she was spoken about by a lot of people who were not even part of that situation was also degrading, all based upon a status that, according to privacy, she doesn't actually have to reveal. Whether she's vaccinated or not is not the cafe owner's business. Their business is their business, okay? And it's nobody else's business, because if you're vaccinated, you shouldn't care anyway. Now, let's step back from my opinion and go back to what is actually the law. Not allowing a person to enter our business because they're not vaccinated could be considered degrading. We do not wish to breach Section 19 of the Human Rights Act 2019, Queensland, which provides that every person lawfully within Queensland has the right to move freely within Queensland. And then we come down to the Australian Constitution, the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900, Section 109, which provides that when a law of state, and again, this is not a law, this is a public order, and a mandate and an order is not a law. When a law of state is inconsistent with the law of the Commonwealth, the latter, the law of the Commonwealth, shall prevail, and the former, the law of the state, shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be invalid. What that means is that Commonwealth and state vaccine passport directions are at odds. Therefore, the Commonwealth law overrides the state directives. Okay? So again, through the interpretation and reasonable excuse of the laws that have been in operation for decades, the cafe owners are still on the right side of the law. They might, for people in the elevator, be on the wrong side and be morally reprehensible, because it makes me feel really uncomfortable that you would allow someone that hasn't had the jibby jab into your store. But is it unlawful? And that's the point that is really important. Okay, the Privacy Act 1988, 94H, requiring the use of COVID safe. A person commits an offence if the person requires another person to download COVID safe to a communication device, or have COVID safe in operation on a communication device, or consent to uploading COVID app data from a communication device to the National COVID Safe Data Store. Now, you don't have to check in on the QR code if you don't want your privacy and your data being stored. So it tends to suggest that the same thing should be true for medical records. If they can make that decision on the governmental website, did a video about that just last week, that if you don't want to check in, if you don't want to use the app, then do not use the app. By using the app, you agree to be monitored wherever you go. So if they're putting that proviso in place, that you don't have to agree to be monitored wherever you go, why should you have to declare your medical status wherever you go? We do not wish to breach Australian Privacy Principle 3, collection of solicited personal information. An entity or organisation cannot collect sensitive information unless the individual consents, and the information is reasonably necessary for, or directly related to, one or more of the entity's function or activities. Okay, let's move on. Civil and Communal Rights article. Now, where is my Biosecurity Act? This applies, in my opinion, from reading the law, to the police as well. We do not wish to breach the Biosecurity Act 2015, whereby Section 60 through 64 deals with imposing human biosecurity control orders on individuals only, not groups of people. A control order, pay attention now, a control order must be given by a biosecurity officer, be in writing from the Director of Biosecurity. By in writing, that's a typo. A copy given to the individual, and the biosecurity officer must be satisfied that the person has one or more symptoms of a listed human disease, or has been exposed to the listed disease, or exposed to someone who has symptoms of the listed disease. And so the cafe doesn't have the right to impose that passport order. Now, Rebecca is covered under the Privacy Act. She's also covered under the Discrimination Act. She's also covered under the Biosecurity Act. What else? Reasonably, you could argue that she's covered under the Human Rights Act. She's covered under the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. She's covered under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 7. No one shall be subjected to blah blah, degrading treatment or punishment. All persons are equal before the law. Okay, so did the police have the right to arrest her? Well, that really boils down to, was Rebecca breaking the law? Now, I would tend to suggest, and I'm hopeful to get an interview with her, that out of courtesy and not wanting to land the cafe in anything, even though, as I've just explained to you and argued for the law, and that's what lawyers do, again, defence and prosecution will take the central law and they will argue reasonable on both sides. And then the jury will make their decision and the judge will pass sentence. That's why we have courts of law, because if it was completely black and white, you wouldn't need to have a court of law. You just have lynch mobs. So Rebecca probably, out of not wanting to land the cafes in it, even though they were doing their own thing, she probably moved to the curb out of courtesy because she just didn't want to have to deal. Now, are the police biosecurity officers? Did Rebecca display any symptoms? Oh, well, Omicron doesn't even have symptoms. How convenient. All the other people that chose to hand over their vaccine passports, that was their choice to do so, but they are not obligated by law to do so. And I've just read that to you. They are not obligated by the law to show that to a cafe. And the cafe owner is not obligated by the law to require it in the first place. Privacy Act, Biosecurity Act, Disability and Discrimination, Australian Constitution, and there's another few peppered in there for good measure. So it's really, really important that you actually start to understand the law so that you can reasonably have conversations on both sides of the fence. You are absolutely within your rights to say flatulence in an elevator is not okay and nobody should do it. That's absolutely fine. You're entitled to that opinion, but is it the law? Should the person that broke wind in the elevator be locked up for the next 5 years because they did something that makes you feel uncomfortable? And that's where we have to get away from this blowing off steam, this pressure cooker mentality, this fight against each other on social media, and start to discuss civilly what is the plumb line. Now let's step back for a moment and I'm going to give my opinion. In my opinion, now again, I didn't see whether the police gave her the right to remain silent and I didn't see whether the police gave her a move on order. However, the fact that her fine was for not following a COVID direction, that tends to suggest that she was not given either of those. And she was willing to give her name and address. And I believe, personally, from reading the law and from seeing how things have worked out anecdotally in the past with other people who have been arrested for non-compliance with COVID directions and have then received a slap on the wrist or have been forgiven of their fine and it's dismissed from court, I would tend to argue, again, as a pseudo lawyer on this video, that Rebecca was unlawfully arrested and that had the police actually have looked through these laws, they would have used the powers of discretion that are openly given to them to just walk away. Because all the people that are sitting in the cafe that are very willing to show their passports, you shouldn't be bothered anyway, because apparently you're protected anyway. And you can transmit and give the virus anyway. And that is agreed on both sides of the fence. That's not just me. You even see that on mainstream media. So, you are within your rights to record. When it comes to the distribution of that recording, that's a sticky wicket, can be. You are within your rights to not have to display your medical privacy, your medical records. They are yours and yours alone. And unless you get a written order from a biosecurity officer because you are displaying symptoms, you don't have to show your records to anybody. That's the law. And the cafe owners are absolutely staying on the right side of the law by respecting privacy, by not discriminating, and by doing their very best to actually serve both sides of the fence. Those who feel better out, better in, and those who feel that flatulence in an elevator is morally reprehensible. So I know this has been a very long video today. I applaud you for staying on. If you haven't yet bought your police pack, please understand that me sitting here on a video and educating you, it doesn't matter in a court of law. It bears no help at all. It's just virtue signaling on social media. Okay? So if you just watch this video and feel morally like, yeah, that's right, she told them, that's not helpful. You need to actually start to put your money where your mouth is. You need to list your business so that people like Rebecca, who whether she's vaxxed or not, can find businesses like you and stay on the right side of the law and not have issues like this. And you need to protect yourselves so that when the police officers do show up, you do understand your right to remain silent. You do understand your right to have the trespass sign on your shop window. And you do understand that if you just give them the printout, you haven't said anything that can be used against you in a court of law. And the money that you've put in as an insurance policy, if the money's there in the legal funds and you get an unlawful fine, the lawyers that have connected with me can help you. But if we only have a couple of hundred people signing up, there's no cash there to protect you. And what are you going to do when you're on the wrong side of a fire burning your house down? I really wish I'd have got fire insurance. We've got 25,000 people on this page now, and I've sold about 200 packs. So, sorry, but that's, you need to go and buy your pack so that people who receive unlawful fines can be covered, so that we can push back now whilst there's time and there's room to push back. Because in another 10, 15, 20 years of this compliance, it's going to go a long way from just, where are your papers, show your passport please, to where we could be going. So if you haven't yet bought your police pack, you need to do so. You really, really need to do so. Don't just sit here and be entertained by a woman telling you things. That doesn't count in a court of law. That doesn't count when you've got police officers standing on your door asking you to do things that you deep down know is not right, but you don't have the tools to push back on that. So thank you for your time today. Once again, I am Rebecca from Fair Business Australia, founder, spokeswoman. If you would like to volunteer, we are looking for more volunteers. We have 50 people now that we are working through, which is extremely exciting, and always growing money on the platform. We have raised over $41,000. My goal is to get to 100,000 by the end of March. And apart from paying for platform overheads, most of that money is going to the legal fund for people like you who might end up on the wrong side of unlawful fine. So together we can push back, together we can rebuild, and we will win. Chat soon. God bless.